The sun pressed down like judgment over Dustwater Hollow, turning every breath into a gasp of dry heat and grit. The land stretched wide and cracked, a thirsty quilt of ochre and dust that swallowed sound and hope in equal measure. Blistering winds whipped across the canyon rim, carrying with them the scent of scorched brush and the distant echo of coyotes. Nothing grew easy here. Nothing stayed alive without a fight. On the far edge of town, where the fences sagged and the soil crumbled underfoot, sat the remnants of what used to be a proud farm. The porch leaned like an old man with a crooked spine, and the roof wore more holes than shingles. Chickens pecked lazily in the dirt, half-feathered and restless, while a rusted plow sat abandoned in the tall, sunburnt weeds like a tombstone to better days. Rows of withered corn stood brittle and skeletal, and a lone scarecrow leaned into the wind as if ready to give up and walk away. Inside the weather-beaten house, Clara May adjusted the frayed hem of her dress. The fabric was stiff from years of washing and sun-drying, patched in more places than it was whole. Her hands were the hands of labor, calloused, darkened by soil and sun, with nails broken from years of harvests that yielded little. Still, her back was straight. Her jaw was set. There was no one left to lean on, and no appetite in her to beg. She tied her hair back with a faded ribbon, once white, now more the color of bone, and gathered the small basket she prepared: 3 eggs, 2 rough loaves of bread, and a bundle of dried herbs wrapped in cloth. Dustwater Hollow had a general store and a saloon, 2 churches, 1 cemetery, and not a drop of mercy between them. Clara walked into town under the stares of people who remembered her when she was Clara Rosefield, daughter of the county's richest land baron. She had once ridden through the streets on a white mare with ribbons in her braids. Now, they looked at her like she was a ghost who hadn't figured out how to stay buried. She kept her eyes low as she entered the trading post, the bell above the door rattling like a death rattle. Inside, the air was thick with tobacco and something sour, pride perhaps. Women in stiff cotton dresses and powdered cheeks clustered near the bolts of fabric, their laughter trailing like perfume. Clara walked past them without pause, placing her modest offerings on the counter. "Eggs again," barked the storekeeper, a man with a neck like a turkey and breath that smelled of molasses and vinegar. "No flour. You'll get salt and thread." "That's it." She nodded, sliding the goods forward. But as she reached into her apron to fetch the herbs, a sharp elbow caught her basket. It hit the floor with a thud. Eggs cracked. The bread split in 2. "Oh, my stars," drawled one of the women, her lips pulled into a smile so false it hurt to look at. "I do hope that wasn't your entire week's trade, Clara." Laughter rolled through the room, like thunder over brittle hills. Clara knelt to gather what she could, her cheeks burning as the yolks soaked into the floorboards. The cracked shells clung to her fingers like shame. No one moved to help her. Even the sheriff, leaning on the doorframe chewing a matchstick, just watched with a bored squint. The same sheriff who'd failed to stop the bank from seizing her land. The same sheriff who'd done nothing when the red vultures rode 3 years back and left her husband broken in the dirt. Her hands trembled, not from anger, but from the sheer weight of it all. The heat, the hunger, the humiliation that never stopped coming. Then the bell above the door rang again. The wind that followed carried with it a silence thicker than any words. Boots struck the floor with purpose. Slow, steady. A shadow fell across Clara and the broken basket. "Pick on someone who don't work harder than you in her sleep," came a voice, low and dry as the canyon wind. She looked up. He was a stranger to Dustwater, no doubt about that. He wore the dust like it belonged to him, his coat sun-bleached and his hat sitting at a permanent angle over one eye. His beard was grizzled, the silver streaked through his hair like lightning bolts through storm clouds. A scar ran from the corner of his left eye down to his neck, and his eyes, pale gray, cold steel, swept across the room with the calm of a man who'd buried more than his share. Elias Boone bent slowly, lifting the crushed bread, the broken herbs, the yolk-drenched cloth. He placed it all back into the basket and stood upright again. No one spoke, not even the sheriff. Boone turned to Clara, his hands calloused and firm as he took hers, pressing the basket into her grip. His eyes met hers, not with pity, but with something older, something like recognition. "You'll wear white someday," he said, voice low but certain. Don't let them make you forget who you are. She blinked, stunned into stillness, the warmth of his grip grounding her like roots sinking back into soil. The women said nothing now. Their laughter had scattered like crows. Even the storekeeper stepped back, muttering into his collar. Boone tipped his hat once to Clara, then turned toward the door as if none of it had happened at all. The son caught the revolver at his hip, just long enough to silence any second thoughts. He paused on the threshold, turned just slightly. Best not touch her again, he said without turning back. Unless you want me to touch back. Then he was gone, swallowed by sunlight and dust. Clara stood alone, the basket in her hands, egg still dripping down her wrist, but something else rising in her chest. Not pride, not yet, but something like breath after nearly drowning. She walked out of the store without a word, head held high. The townsfolk parted for her now. No one met her eyes, but they moved aside like maybe, just maybe, she mattered again. And for the first time in years, the wind didn't feel like it was trying to push her down. It felt like it might carry her forward. Dustwater Hollow didn't take kindly to strangers, and Elias Boone knew it. He arrived with the wind and lingered like a question nobody wanted to ask. After the store incident, the town watched him, side glances over shoulders, whispered speculations traded like poker chips. Some said he was a bounty hunter running from a failed job. Others whispered darker things, a preacher who'd lost his flock to fire and vengeance. A few muttered the word outlaw, but not loud enough for it to stick. He paid for a room upstairs at the Copper Lantern Inn, left 2 coins heavier than the innkeeper had seen all year, and kept mostly to himself. At night, he drank a single glass of rye and stared at the fire like it might confess something. He wore his revolver not like a threat, but like a memory, something he couldn't put down even if he wanted to. And yet, every morning, he walked back out to Clara May's farm. At first, she resented it. Resented the way he lifted fence posts without asking, the way he examined her broken roof, like it was his burden too. She had spent too many years learning to need no one. His presence felt like pressure, like an unwanted reminder that there were still things she hadn't let herself feel. Trust, safety, perhaps even hope. Still, when he patched the roof with the precision of a surgeon and not once complained about the heat, she didn't stop him. When he oiled the rusted hinges of her barn door and fixed the latch she hadn't bothered with in months, she left him a cup of coffee on the porch without a word. That was their rhythm. Silence, labor, and slow. Mutual understanding. She never asked where he came from, and he never volunteered. But he looked at the land like someone who had lost something once and wanted it back. The stillness didn't last. They came on a Monday, riding hard and raising dust like a storm on horseback. 6 of them, the horses black and red with dust, the men worse. The red vultures, riders with sun-scorched bandanas and eyes like empty wells. Their leader, Jeb Caro, wore a coat stitched from wolf pelts and a grin carved from cruelty. Clara stood at her porch as they rolled in. Elias wasn't there that morning. Just her, the chickens, and the wind. "Well, if it ain't the widow," Jeb called out, sliding from his horse with theatrical grace. His boots clicked against the dry boards as he stepped closer, the others fanning out like shadows behind him. "Heard you was still scratching a living out here, like a goddamn badger." Clara didn't flinch. "You can turn right around, Jeb. I've got nothing for you." "Now that's not true," he chuckled, his teeth flashing like broken glass. "You got a farm. You got grit. You got memories I'd love to stomp out once and for all." He stepped closer. Too close. "I remember the last time you came," she said. Her voice was ice steady. "My husband told you no. You put him in the ground." Jeb's smile widened. "I put a message in the ground, sweetheart. You just didn't read it properly." One of the men spat on the dirt. Another fingered the hilt of his knife. The air buzzed with heat and tension. "You keep refusing our protection," Jeb said, circling her now, boots thudding against the porch. "And this pretty little shack of yours might not be here next time we ride through." Clara stared straight ahead, unmoving. Then the sound of boots behind them. Measured. Calm. Elias Boone walked around the side of the house, hammer still in hand, eyes locked on Jeb like he was already calculating the distance between breath and bullet. "Didn't your mama teach you to knock?" he asked dryly. Jeb turned, something in his posture stiffening. "Well, I'll be. Who's this?" "Just a man who doesn't like vultures circling what ain't dead," Elias said. He didn't raise his voice. Didn't need to. Jeb's eyes flicked to the revolver at Elias's hip, then back to his face. "You a hired hand? Or just another drifter with a death wish?" "Neither," Elias said. "But I am standing between you and this farm. So if you've got business, make it fast. If not, get." The tension pulsed in the air, hot and sharp. Jeb stared for a long moment, then barked a laugh. "Well, ain't this cozy? We'll be back, widow. With fire next time." They rode off, hooves thundering into the canyon silence. That evening, the sun sank blood-red over the horizon, and Clara found Elias out by the well, oiling his revolver. She sat beside him on the edge of the stone circle. For a while, they said nothing, just the squeak of the cloth, the metallic click of the cylinder, the slow creak of the windmill behind them. Then she saw it, the engraving, faint but unmistakable. U.S. Marshal. Clara looked at him, a question forming but not spoken. He didn't look up, just kept polishing the barrel. "They murdered my wife," he said, "and my boy, in a town like this one, 3 winters back. I was tracking a gang, this same gang, though I didn't know it then. Got too close. Paid too late." She didn't breathe, just listened. "I buried them with my badge. Left it under the stone, walked away from the law. Spent 2 years chasing shadows. I was always a step behind." He finally looked at her. "Then I came here. Saw you. Heard the name Jeb Caro again. And I knew this was the place I'd been heading all along." Clara's voice was rough. "I don't need saving." "I know," he said. "That's why I stayed." She stood slowly, the dusk drawing long shadows between them. For the first time, her shoulders didn't seem so heavy. She looked down at him, eyes clear. "If we're going to fight," she said, "we fight on my land. My terms." Elias nodded. "Then we fight together." The wind stirred around them, dry and full of promises. In the distance, the last light of day faded behind the canyon, but neither of them looked away. The air turned colder as summer waned, but there was no peace in the changing wind. Each morning began with sweat and silence, Clara gripping the rifle with trembling hands, Elias standing behind her with the calm patience of someone who had seen too much and survived it all. The first shot missed the target entirely, thudding into the barn wall with a puff of dust. "Again," he said. She loaded with shaking fingers, exhaled and fired. Closer. And again. And again. Until her shoulders ached and her fingers blistered. Until the rifle felt like an extension of her arm, not a borrowed burden. By noon, she could strike a 10 cat at 30 paces. By the end of the week, she was cutting rope from a hanging fence post midsway. Elias didn't praise her. He just nodded once, and that was enough. They worked from dawn to nightfall, digging shallow trenches behind the shed, stringing tripwires across the yard, hiding rifles under loose boards. Clara sharpened stakes with her own hands and painted the white bandana that once held her hair, now reborn as a symbol she would wear on her arm when the time came. Others began to arrive. A boy from the livery brought nails and hammer without a word. A widow from the church carried sacks of flour, quietly leaving them on Clara's porch. A carpenter patched the back door and said it was time someone stood for something. Dustwater Hollow, it seemed, was waking up. Then came the morning of smoke. The sky was red long before the fire touched the land. Hooves thundered over the hilltop like war drums. 6 riders again, the red vultures, cloaked in dust and shadow. Jeb Caro rode front and center, his grin wide, his coat billowing like a preacher's robe of ruin. Clara stood waiting in the yard, her rifle steady, the white bandana tied tight around her upper arm. Her eyes did not blink, and her hands did not shake. Beside her, Elias checked the sight of his revolver and whispered, "Let them come." Jeb didn't dismount this time. He raised his hand, and his riders fanned out. "You really think you can stop me, widow?" he barked. Clara lifted her rifle. "I don't think. I know." He laughed. The first rider charged, gun raised, but the earth exploded beneath his horse as a tripwire yanked taut and snapped a hidden rig. The animal reared, throwing the man clear across the yard. Gunfire cracked from the second-story window. One rider fell, his chest bursting red, rifle clattering beside him. Elias moved like a whisper between fence posts, cool and methodical. 2 more shots. 2 more down. Then silence, momentary, vicious. Jeb dismounted now, stalking toward the house like a man who had never been stopped. He fired twice. The boards beside Clara's head splintered, dust and wood slapping her cheeks. She didn't flinch. She turned, aimed and shot. The bullet struck Jeb clean through the thigh. He roared and fell to one knee, blood darkening the dust beneath him. His revolver slipped from his fingers. Elias stepped forward now, slow and sure, the barrel of his gun locked on Jeb's chest. Jeb's eyes widened. "Do it," he spat. "Kill me, you bastard." Elias stood over him, his finger tightening, then easing. "No," he said. "That's not justice. That's revenge." He turned his head, called out, "Sheriff, you watching? Come take your outlaw." And from behind the chicken coop, where he'd hidden all morning, the sheriff emerged, hat in hand, shame curling his spine. He took the irons from his belt and locked Jeb's wrists. It was over. The fires had never reached the farmhouse. The traps remained mostly untriggered. Elias and Clara stood among the broken silence of the yard, their breath heavy in the scorched air, watching as the law, such as it was, hauled the vultures away. The days that followed were quiet. The townsfolk now nodded when they passed Clara on the street. Some spoke. Others offered to help. The mocking was gone, replaced with something wary, perhaps even reverent. Elias stayed, not in the inn, not in the shadows, but in Clara's home, his boots beside hers at the door, his coat hanging next to her apron. He never reclaimed a badge, never needed to. They worked the land together, side by side, tilling soil that once refused to give, but now yielded to the stubborn kindness of their care. And one morning, as the frost finally lifted from the fields and the world smelled of damp earth and wild sage, Clara walked down the hill in a simple white dress. No lace, no veil, just the wind in her hair and the morning light on her face. Elias was waiting by the fence, hammer in hand, sweat on his brow and peace in his eyes. In Dustwater Hollow, they still tell the tale of the woman they tried to break with shame and dust, who stood her ground with a rifle and a scarred man by her side. The woman who rose from rags and ruin, who wore white not to be wed, but to be seen. And the wind, when it moves just right through the canyon, still whispers her name.